Hello, I'm Isidoros Parlamas. This open letter is about President Putin and Biden, but it is addressed to all citizens of the world. Both of you are presidents, but that is not the point. The point is what exactly you have been presiding over. It is assumed that both of you want to be accepted and respected, and in the end, you want your decisions, policies, and course of action over your tenure as presidents to be vindicated in the minds of citizens as well as in the annals of history. Let me start with President Putin. President Putin, you have been president of Russia for over 16 years and prime minister for 4 years. That is, you have been in absolute power for over 2 decades. Disgrace number 1. Russia has a population of 150 million people, 3/5 of whom have been condemned to live in poverty forever, notwithstanding that Russia is the richest country in natural resources in the world. Please do not interrupt me. Let me finish. Disgrace number 2. Let me remind you that he who commissions a crime is more guilty than he who is the physical perpetrator of that crime. So far, you have commissioned the murders of scores of journalists. Disgrace number 3. You have commissioned the fatal poisoning of at least 3 Russian dissidents. Disgrace number 4. You have commissioned the legal engineering to have scores, if not hundreds, of dissidents imprisoned, at least the latest of whom is Alexei Navalny. Disgrace number 5. How much is your official monthly salary, President Putin? $11,500 or 746,000 rubles, right? Where do you live, President Putin? And where do a lot of Russians live? This is your palace here on the left, and this is where people live on the right. A lot of Russians. That's Lorino, Bering Strait, Russia. Now we see this lady in Moscow. Okay, this old lady, around 80 years old, playing the accordion. And here on the right we see pensioners at the same age in Sweden. Now, why should there be such a huge difference, Mr. Putin? Where do you live, President Putin? And how do you account for living in a $2 billion palace? Is that the idea of helping your country? Is that the idea of patriotism? Have you become president of Russia to help your country or to plunder your country, to enrich yourself and your cronies? Your father's name is Spiridon, a Greek name. What would he say to you if he knew your machinations? Would he approve? Would he disapprove? How would you feel about your president if he were like you and if you were one of the tens of millions of Russians living in poverty? What do you think is going through the mind of that old lady playing the accordion to make a living? Do you think she admires you? Do you think she loves you? Do you think she is proud of Russia, her country? Disgrace number 6. Recently you said in public that unfortunately you had to work as a taxi driver after the dissolution of the Soviet Union. Let's hear.
Конечно, жил как все, но иногда приходилось подрабатывать и извозом. Неприятно об этом говорить, имеется в виду на машине подрабатывать, частным извозом. Неприятно об этом говорить, откровенно, честно если сказать, но, к сожалению, и это тоже было.
Why do you think it's unfortunate for you to work as a taxi driver, but it's okay for millions of Russians to go hungry, without heat and without medical coverage? You obviously think you are special and entitled to living in palaces and to having access to everything you wish, while others were born to suffer because there are not enough economic goods to go around. A country's leader is writ large the quality of life of the majority of a country's citizens, and you have been Russia's leader for over 20 years. What do you have to say to that, President Putin? I've noticed that you react to criticism by pointing out that leaders in other countries also adopt similar practices to yours. It's like saying, I don't mind being a callous fool as long as there are more callous fools like me out there. Do you realize what that says about you? I am not sure you do. Among other things, in Plato's Republic, Socrates said, a sure sign of stupidity is when someone is incapable of feeling shame no matter what. Are you really proud of yourself, President Putin? Do you, President Putin, feel ashamed of yourself for having squandered the opportunity you've had to turn things around for the better in Russia? Are you scared because you feel you may be assassinated if you stand up to the thugs that surround you and help you cling to power? Have you ever thought that a leader is supposed to place his country above his life? Do you know these names, President Putin? Leonidas of Sparta, Socrates, Stanislav Petrov, Julia Korol, Olaf Palme, and so many others? What about these names, President Putin? Ephialtes of Euridimes, Alcibiades, Kemal Atatürk, Stalin, Hitler, Pablo Escobar, and so many others. What is it going to be? Remember, you are not going to live forever. It's now or never. Let's wrap it up. Disgrace number 1 points to gross and total incompetence. Disgraces number 2, 3, and 4 point to murderous cowardice and a total ethical deficit. Disgrace number 5 points to greed and vulgarity. Disgrace number 6 points to narcissism. Do you really think you are respected? Would you ever respect someone like yourself? I don't think so. However, a lot of people like you have a buried treasure deep down, but that won't do you or us any good unless you manage to unearth that treasure today, if it's there, and make use of it. Could you please discuss this possibility with yourself, President Putin? Now let me talk to President Biden. President Biden, you have been around Congress and the White House for about 50 years now, which means that you have been a witness to the callous workings and machinations of US politicking. Please do not interrupt me. Just bear with me because I intend to explain myself. Disgrace number 1. The US population is about 330 million people, and 1/3 of them have been condemned to living in poverty forever, just like in third and fourth world economies. Another 1/5 of the population have been living in total and perpetual financial insecurity, and only about 160 million have been living in conditions of second and first world economies. Let us not forget that the quality of life of the citizenry reflects the quality of the political system and those who had and have been entrusted to implement that political system's policies. Now, in that respect, the US has been a laggard all along. The quality of life in the US is low and comparable to those quality of lives in several third world countries. Governments at all levels, federal, state, and local, have diachronically failed the American people big time. It defies logic that 50% of the US population, the country with the highest economic output for at least a century, have been living in conditions of varying degrees of poverty for an equal period of time. There is only one reason for this: government corruption. While taxes is supposed to be a collective savings account that belongs equally to all Americans to be used to finance public goods and services, such as the armed forces, the police, the fire departments, schools at all levels, the correctional system, healthcare, etc., tax revenues have systematically benefited consistently and disproportionately about 20% of the population. In the US, fleecing the majority of the American people of their own money and wealth has been elevated to both a high art and a meticulous science. In reality, The US governments have been so good at it that they have exported their know-how to most countries around the world. It is fair to say that the US has been and still is one of the top most corrupt countries in the whole world. In the corridors of the federal, state and local governments, thousands of legislators, policemen and judges graduate each year from the College of Fleecing and Hoodwinking the Public. Did you know that such a college existed? You didn't. Well, now you know. CFHP. And listen to this. The economy in Russia is about the economy of New York City, maybe New York State. That's the size of the economy in Russia. So you have there's less to plunder and less people to plunder it. In the US, with such a huge economy, there's more people to plunder it, and they plunder much more. So that is why the US is the most corrupt country in the world in terms of how much is plundered each year. Now, methods such as overcharging goods and services and kicking back the difference to all three branches of government has been rampant, and this is one of the most prevalent ways that tax revenues disappear. Another method, which amounts to inside trading, is when legislators, policemen and judges, as well as their extended families and friends, buy stock, bonds and other financial instruments in anticipation of legislation which is slated to pass either imminently or in the long run. Another way that governments have systematically been stealing public money and wealth is through special districts. Now, few of you would know about the existence of special districts. Now, let's read. The mysterious special districts are government entities that exist outside of traditional forms of general purpose local and state governments. Sometimes known as authorities or quasi-public agencies, they serve key governmental functions such as providing public transit or public housing. But despite being public entities that provide public services, special districts are often unknown to the public, and often do business without adhering to modern standards of government budget or spending transparency. They are unknown to the public and do business without adhering, to standards and transparency. They are also known as special service districts, special district governments, limited purpose entities, or special purpose districts, and are independent, special purpose governmental units that exist separately from local governments, such as county, municipal, and township governments, with substantial administrative and fiscal independence. They are formed to perform a single function or a set of related functions. The term special district governments, as defined by the U.S. Census Bureau, excludes school districts. In 2020, the U.S. had more than 51,296 special district governments with a total annual estimated budget of about $200 billion, admittedly peanuts compared to the total amount governments manage to steal year after year. Each district is governed by a board of directors, commissioners, board of supervisors, or the like. These boards may be appointed by public officials, appointed by private entities, popularly elected, or elected by benefited citizens, typically property owners. Sometimes one or more public officials will serve as an ex officio member on the board. The board of a special district serves primarily as a managing board and often appoints a chief executive for day-to-day operations and decision-making and policy implementation. Most districts have employees, but some districts exist solely to raise funds by issuing bonds and or by providing tax increment financing. On paper, special districts perform many functions including airports, ports, highways, mass transit, parking facilities, fire protection, libraries, parks, cemeteries, hospitals, irrigation, conservation, sewerage, wastewater treatment, solid waste, fiber optic systems, stadiums, water supply, electric power and natural gas utility. But the primary purpose is to fleece citizens out of the federal, state and local taxes they pay, hence their inherent lack of transparency. Yet another of several ways that the US government used to con citizens is by having the FBI, the CIA, the NSA, etc. constantly create enemies such as another country or a terrorist organization or a domestic threat, so they can appropriate more and more billions and trillions of dollars to ostensibly combat them. A good percentage of the earmarked funds allocated to combat those created enemies a la carte end up in offshore accounts belonging to legislators, policemen, army brass, judges, as well as their business associates. Remember that the true role of the secret agencies is to cover the tracks of corrupt government officials, period. Also remember that organized crime in the US has always been colluding with governments at all levels, being in effect the fifth branch of government, the fourth being the mass media. It is no coincidence, of course, that virtually all members of all branches of government are invariably in a far better financial situation than their official salaries and benefits would suggest. Because of those practices, there is no political will or money left to invest in elevating the quality of life of the citizenry, like the Scandinavian countries have consistently been doing. It goes then without saying, President Biden, that you have been aware of these practices all along, but have been either unwilling or unable or both to make a difference, let alone acknowledge publicly the mere existence of such practices. Disgrace number 2. Drug addiction and drug trafficking has been a menace in the US for decades. Expressions like "to save American lives" and "American lives were saved" sound hollow, tragical and comical all at the same time. Only last year, about 120,000 Americans died because of overdosing, and that is the official estimate. We can safely conclude that in the last decade, at least 1 million Americans have overdosed themselves to death. The legal circus in the US, prosecutors, attorneys, law enforcement, judges, correctional facilities, etc., enrich themselves literally on the graves of Americans. Trillions of dollars have been allocated over the years to combat drug use and drug trafficking, only to see the problem worsen. Where has all that money gone? Well, disgrace number 1 explains it all. The US does not want the drug problem solved because governments at all levels make a lot of money because of it. The US government did even the unthinkable when the FDA approved OxyContin, an opioid, as a painkiller on August 13, 1995. It makes sense. The system needed new customers to buy drugs off the street, and they figured that those who would be prescribed OxyContin would end up doing just that. You may ask President Biden, do you have any proof to support your allegations? No, I do not have any legalistic proof, but I do have de facto proof. The quality of life on the ground is overwhelming proof that my allegations make sense. However, there will come the day when legalistic proof will also be available, as the Panama and Pandora Papers suggest. The FDA knew what OxyContin would cause, but they went ahead and approved it anyway. The US is often referred to as the nation of drug addicts, since an estimated 40% of the population between 15 and 50 years old use drugs on a regular basis. Does the federal government care? Do the state governments care? The answer is no. Disgrace number 3. Power abuse and brutality on the part of law enforcement is yet another phenomenon in the US that goes a long way in exposing the cynicism which permeates governments. The callousness and the idiocy of the police and the FBI is unprecedented. People call the police for help, and what they get is a few bullets in their bodies instead. Qualified immunity demonstrates the cynicism and the hypocrisy. They shoot at old people, children, teenagers. They try 12-year-olds as adults. How can one get more callous than that? Attitudes like that shame all humanity. By trying 12-year-olds as adults, you are saying that children are mature enough to be held responsible for their actions. If children are mature enough to be held responsible for their actions, how come their parents, teachers, clergy, and government are not mature enough to be responsible for the children's actions? Children's actions reflect the citizenry's quality of life and ethics. One must be a coward to put children on trial when they should put themselves on trial. Law enforcement? Selective law enforcement, for sure. Is the law enforced in jails and prisons? What's been happening in Rikers and most prisons in the US? When a person is found guilty and sentenced to, let's say, 1 year in prison, they are also sentenced to 1 year of humiliation, sexual assault, disease, physical abuse, malnutrition, etc. That is not law enforcement. Law is not supposed to be enforced selectively, and the spirit of the law must always be evident and respected. First, government policies turn citizens into drug addicts, and then they arrest them for drug use. That's a definition of hypocrisy. What is hypocrisy? Hypocrisy is trying to convince others of something you do not believe yourself. How is drug addiction a crime when all doctors concur that it is a medical condition? The answer is hypocrisy. Drug addicts should be taken to hospital, not to jails. Legalization of drug use for those who are already drug addicts would solve the problem overnight, but it would also deprive the government's billions upon billions of extra illegal and unethical income. Why would anyone buy drugs off the street if they could walk to the nearest hospital and get a safe dose? Crime would disappear from the streets, but then how could they allocate huge sums to fight crime and line their pockets in the process? President Biden, if I can see how all this is connected, you can surely see too. But what have you done all those years to change it? What are you planning on doing to change it during your guard as president? I haven't heard you have any plans on that. Disgrace number 4. Incarceration in the United States. Now, incarceration in the United States is a primary form of punishment and rehabilitation for the commission of felony and other offenses. The United States has the largest prison population in the world, the largest prison population in the world. You hear that? And the highest per capita incarceration rate. And the highest per capita incarceration rate. That's even more important. Well, you can read the rest. It's here. Okay, it's here. Also, you can, well, that's, let me see if I can zoom out a little bit. No, that's, so you can read this yourself. And now, since a crime committed cannot be undone, it is absurd to assume that punishment, revenge, and financial compensation amount to justice. The nature of justice is preventive. The nature of punishment, revenge, and financial compensation is not preventive. Conclusion: in the US, there is no justice, only crime. Of course, that is not true only in the US, but in most countries of the world, save the Scandinavian countries, where crime rates are very low, which means that crime is prevented from taking place. Let me ask you this, President Biden. If in a nation the government tries and condemns children as adults and sends them to prison to be raped, abused, and exploited, then what is the future of such a nation? Remember, a good percentage of the funds allocated to run the correctional system ends in the pockets of government employees, either legally or illegally. Therefore, there needs to be a large number of incarcerated citizens, since their incarceration generates revenue for the government and creates opportunity for graft and grift. I am sure, President Biden, that you are aware of all these practices. Disgrace number 5. Gun ownership laws and deaths caused because of those laws is a well-known phenomenon in the US. Thousands of American people are shot dead every year in the US thanks to those laws. There is no political will to change the laws because the pseudo-politicians do not want to risk losing votes, and also because the National Rifle Association contributes large amounts to the pseudo-political campaigns of the pseudo-political parties. Why do I call the system pseudo-political? Because it's not a political system, it's a politicking system. There's no politics, it's politicking. There's a huge difference. Okay? What is politics? Well, politics is the production of actions that do not harm a single citizen. That's politics. If the overwhelming majority of your actions daily do not harm a single citizen, you are a politician. Now, these people, what they do, their actions, harm millions, tens of millions of people daily. So they are not politicians. To be a politician is an honorable thing. So they use honorable terms to hide their ugliness. They use democracy, communism, and politics. These people are not politicians. They are politicking artists. There's a huge difference. Okay? And I have just defined politics. Politics is the production of actions that do not harm a single citizen. I have talked about this in other occasions. Anyway, let us continue. Remember, what they call politics in the US is really politicking. Not only in the US, in most of the world. Public shootings in shopping malls, concerts, schools and universities make people around the world wonder about the collective mental condition of the American nation. So far, no president has been willing to risk his so-called political fortunes to severely limit or ban gun ownership. What about you, President Biden? So much for saving American lives. Disgrace number 6. There has never ever existed democracy on earth. The closest we've ever come to democracy was in classical Athens during Pericles' time. The political system in the US is as democratic as the political system in the Soviet Union was communist. Just like democracy, there has never ever existed communism on earth. The Soviet Union's political system was communism only in name, when in reality it was tyranny, Stalinism, Sovietism, thuggery. What is communism? Communism is equal access for all citizens to the economic resources of a given political entity, be it a city or a country. Very simple. That's what communism is. In the Soviet Union, only 5 to 10% of the citizens had access to the economic resources of the country, while the rest had access to the leftovers. In the same way, the political system in the US is democratic only in name, when in reality it is camouflaged tyranny, hypocrisy in its apogee. Remember, number 1, voting does not amount to democracy. Number 2, permanent power and democracy are mutually exclusive terms. Any political power retained by any citizen for a period of time over 36 days is considered permanent power. Routinely, policemen, judges, presidents, legislators, etc. rule for many years. Hence, there has been no democracy ever. What is democracy? Democracy is power exercised by all citizens personally and on a rotating basis. That's what democracy means. Demo, which means people, and cracy, which means in control. People in control of their own destiny. For example, depending on the demographics, each citizen serves as a policeman for 2 weeks, patrolling their streets, serves as a juror in court for 2 weeks during each year, and as a legislator for another 2 weeks, on a rotating basis, alphabetical order, That's what democracy is. People should govern themselves and blame themselves for the mistakes they make and enjoy the benefits in case of good government. There's no Clintons, there's no Bidens, there's no Nixons, there's no one. It's only themselves to congratulate or blame. And it's a process. You learn how to govern yourself. You take your own, your personal business into your own hands. If people were in control of their own destiny in the US, they would not choose to end up as drug addicts or in prison, or have their kids tried as adults and sent to prison to be raped and abused, or end up homeless, sleeping in the streets and in tents on sidewalks and under bridges, millions of them, or shoot each other in public places, or live in crime-ridden neighborhoods. It is obvious that there is no democracy in the US or anywhere else in the world. As we speak, we can find the political system closest to democracy in the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Norway, and Iceland. And so you'd better listen to what Bernie Sanders has to say, unless you enjoy living in a society which resembles a jungle. Democracy is much, much more than voting and free speech. Speaking of free speech, Snowden and Assange are fugitives just because they exercise the right to speak freely. So stop being so gullible. If you hope that by delegating to unknown people the management of your personal business, such as education, health, security, justice, the economy, defense, etc., will solve your problem, you will be disappointed. Those people will use the authority you give them by voting for them to take advantage of you and enrich themselves in any way they can. I am sure, President Biden, that you are aware of all this. So, President Biden and President Putin and President Biden, what have you been presiding over? Tyrannies and con-states. What can you do about it? A lot, if you care about right and wrong. You are currently in negotiations on Ukraine. The impression both of you give is that you have agreed to start a war. That's right. That's what you are telling us. Okay? Your theatrics are not good enough. You have agreed to start a war. On the surface, you are trying to avoid it, but you both say that the other side's conditions are unacceptable. China, Israel, Pakistan, Turkey, to name just a few countries, will be happy for very different reasons, each of them, to see a weakened US and Russia. Now, I don't put Israel in the same category as China, Pakistan, and Turkey, but I'm including Israel for very different reasons that I'm including China, Pakistan, and Turkey. Why don't both of you, together with China, enter into a partnership to get rid of all nuclear weapons instead? Why, I'm asking again, why don't both of you, together with China, enter into a partnership to get rid of all nuclear weapons instead? Why do you have to go to war? Think about that. Why? Why do you have to go to war? Why? Is it because your bosses tell you to? And you call yourselves leaders? Some advisors both of you must have. Some choices both of you have made. Oh, the Trump phenomenon? Just one of the consequences of perennial corruption. The previous administrations paved the way for the Trump phenomenon. What did you expect? Trump is less of a hypocrite than the Kennedys, the Johnsons, the Nixons, the Fords, the Reagans, the Bushes, the Clintons, and the Obamas. I have left President Carter out of the group on purpose because the guy has values. Trump declares openly that he wants to be a strongman. The rest of you have been feeding the Americans a line on pseudo-democracy. There is still time, President Biden and President Putin. All the best, Isidoros Parlamas.